Welcome to Yelling Into the Void, a podcast discussing and exploring topics in World of Warcraft. I'm Tevin. I'm joined as always by Scott. And Scott, 2 weeks ago when we recorded, we stated that if the Eagles won the Super Bowl, then it was going to be a good 11.1 patch.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's the reality we live in now, Scott.
E-A-G-L-E-S, Eagles! Woo!
You better not let us down. That's all I'm going to say.
Or pretty much guaranteed, man. Pretty much guaranteed. You are welcome.
Rioting in the streets of Dornegal and setting shit on fire and knocking down light poles and whatnot.
Don't worry, they greased up those light poles in Dornegal. It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
But Scott, we haven't talked for a whole week.
Yeah.
But
I want to apologize for that. That was my bad completely. Or I should say that was the influenza virus's bad completely. I got the flu last week. It sucked. It was awful.
Well, I'm glad you feel better now. But there is something, there's an elephant in the room that we need to talk about, Scott.
Oh.
And not necessarily a bad elephant. A very good, big elephant. Huge Mythic Plus changes.
Yeah.
Huge.
Right after we recorded 2 weeks ago, Blizzard changed the game, literally.
And I'm not going to say that we didn't see this coming, because I think you and I definitely did see this coming. There is one thing in here that I think is very telling for their thought process on what's going on here, and we'll get into that later. But essentially, the one thing that you and I have been complaining about a lot, which is the level 7 affix, when you get that additional death penalty, has been moved to where they have decided the cutoff for high keys is. And I think that barring removing it entirely, that's the best solution that they could have done with that. So
yeah. That was, I mean, we're going to talk about every single one of these huge changes in detail. That was the only one I expected, or at least the moving it away from 7. I thought maybe they would just get rid of it entirely. But that was like the only thing I expected on this list of things. Everything else on here is kind of like, what? What?
So since we did have the extra week, though, we do have a little bit more news to cover. And so there was a housing announcement. So we'll get into that a little bit too.
Yeah.
It's not much, but it's at least something to go off of. And it's something that I liked hearing. I read it and I was like, yeah, they've got this nailed. They know exactly what people are wanting out of this. They took, in my opinion, the Final Fantasy system and they made it less bullshit. The Final Fantasy lotteries are cool when you win, but you don't win very often. So yeah, they essentially took the like neighborhoods from Final Fantasy, put them into WoW, removed the like randomness of you winning. The only difference is I'm still not sure if these like neighborhoods are going to be accessible publicly. Like it seems like there's public neighborhoods that you can go to, but again, we can talk about that a little bit later. I'm still a little bit unsure on that.
Yeah, the one thing I want to say that they did absolutely do is they took off their gauntlet and they strolled over to Japan and they just fucking slapped Square Enix in the face with this announcement. I mean, they were very explicitly calling out almost by name some of the big pain points in the Final Fantasy 14 housing system. So they're not holding back there. I think it's very funny that they come like 10 years late and then they're like, well, we're not going to do it this way.
I guess what's the only other thing to talk about, Scott? TGP happened. The first week of it happened a couple weeks ago. The second week happened this week.
Yeah, the finals is this Friday, I believe. They're going right into the grand finals. Usually they have a week break, but not this time. We're going right into it.
And I think a lot of the TGP stuff that had happened and the format changes that they made here made it a lot more easily viewable, which I think is a very good thing. It is still weird that it's so late in the season. It is still weird that it is so rushed, it feels like, comparatively to what it has been in the past. But I mean, hey, all in all, that's kind of what we thought was going to happen when they decided they wanted to do everything in one season with the MDI and TGP, Race to World First, AWC, like everything in every season.
Yeah, I kind of looking back on it now as we approach the end of season 1 competitiveness, right? I think the global finals this Friday, Saturday, Sunday will represent the last of the competitions in season 1, right? Um, the question has to be why. Like, what was it? What was it that made them think that it would be good for the game and good for the competition if we did a MDI and a TGP in the same season?
Mm-hmm.
I don't quite see the reasoning for that, and I feel like the way things have turned out this season has kind of proven that a season can't support both of those things. I mean, maybe it's just a bad coincidence, and the reason why I think we should step back and say nobody watched this weekend. Like, I mean, not nobody, but like objectively, if you looked at the view count numbers on Group B, which started on the 9th, ended on the 9th, actually, very few people were watching comparative to previous seasons competitions. And so you just have to wonder, like, was this a season thing? Like, is this because this season of Mythic Plus has been so rough and people are just so indifferent to it? Or was it
Yeah.
just a late in the season thing? Or was it just that, like, this game mode doesn't support 2 competitions a season thing? I'm not sure. Like, it is very possible that let's pretend season 2 is a rousing success. Everyone loves it. Like, numbers are skyrocketing. Maybe a season like that could support both competitions, where people love
Mm-hmm.
these dungeons. There's lots of fun tech happening, and it's just fun to watch. But this season was not it, and so I do wonder if they're like, well, that was an experiment, and next season we're just going to do MDI or just going to do TGP. I wonder. I don't know.
Yeah, I would like them to see, or I would like to see them go back to the old way of doing things where they alternate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. We'll end up seeing what happens. I don't really know what the intention was for doing this all in one season. Like, I don't know what the driving factor of that was. Um, so I guess we'll see if there is still that factor and they still want to keep pushing it forward. But
Yeah.
yeah, I would like to see them go back to doing it the way that they were before.
There's another thing, and I didn't watch this competition very closely, but like one of the most fun things to watch in the MDI and TGP has been crazy strategies, crazy, like, uh, creative use of game mechanic moments that the teams do something that no one's ever seen before, and there's that holy shit, how do they even do that moment?
Mm-hmm.
I felt like we didn't have any of those this time around. I felt like through both the MDI and the TGP, it was mostly just who was, really good at pulling, um, who played the cleanest and most efficient. And while that's good to see, it's like kind of boring from a viewer perspective.
In part, though, is that due to, I mean, obviously it's due to the fact that they didn't have as much time to practice, right? But also, how much of that is attributed to the fact that, like, Echo and Mandatory are really the ones who pioneer those crazy strats, and we only had one of those teams
Yeah,
in the
no, that's
competitions
fair.
this time.
That's fair. Yeah,
So,
I don't know.
anyways, Scott, I think we should hold on that because I think we've got a lot to cover with Mythic Plus, and I do think that that's going to take you and I quite a bit of time to go through because let's just say these changes, I don't think there's a single one of these changes that pisses me off. I think all of these are very, 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 very good changes for
Mhm.
the system.
Yeah, huge system redefining changes. A thing that and we talked about this probably a month ago. I thought was probably too late to do in a mid expansion patch. I thought some of this stuff would be things you'd probably have to wait till midnight for, but nope. They
Well,
recognized that the numbers are bad and they needed to do something about it.
the one thing that I do want to say with all of these changes is what I was talking about earlier is it seems like they are getting closer to understanding that they have drawn this line between lower keys and high end keys,
Mm-hmm.
and they're starting to like more shift things in that direction, which is something that you and I were asking for ever since the inception of this, like plus 12 is higher level keys. So a lot of these changes you're going to see are really focused on shifting difficulty towards the higher end and allowing people who only want to do their 10s for their weekly to get in, do those, and be done with the system entirely, which for me, that kind of stinks because I like running keys over and over and over again. But for the person who doesn't like running keys, I think that these are very good changes.
Mm-hmm.
So, that being said, I guess let's start with M0s. M0s are going back to being a weekly lockout, but they're rewarding champion gear, which is actually going to give us an avenue to gear outside of delves. Albeit, again, it's going back to a weekly lockout, so I'm not sure what that's going to look like in comparison to delves. But that in tandem with delves should really get you geared up in about a week. I can only imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should say one of the kind of the stated design goals for these changes is acknowledging this weird thing that was happening in season 1, where delves gave such good gear that you basically could skip Mythic Plus all the way up until about a 7 key. That like you could just get good enough gear out of delves to skip the entire M0 and M2 through 6 range and jump right into 7s. And for new players jumping into a 7 key for the first time, the 7 key was just way, way, way too hard between just the general scaling and then also the Challenger's Peril affix in there. It was just way too hard for people that didn't really get a chance to learn the dungeon and learn the stuff under more forgiving affixes and timers and things like that. So this M0 change is part of that. I'm glad because, remember when we first realized this back right before the start of season 1, where we realized that M0 did not give champion gear, and we just we're like, okay, well, why do them then?
Mm-hmm.
There's no point, actually.
Yeah, I remember us all being happy that M0s were going to a daily lockout, and then we were like, oh, wait, this sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks. So, again, they're going back to being a weekly lockout. So no more can you go in and do an M0 on Monday and then, or I guess on Tuesday and then go do it on Wednesday. You will have to wait for the weekly reset to go back and do a dungeon that you've already done for the week. But you will be getting awarded champion gear again, which is the same as it was in Dragonflight. And on top of that, like I said, you still have delves. Delves are still awarding decent item level gear. Delves are being nerfed slightly, I think. But I think they are still going to be a very good avenue for gearing alts, I think, for the most part. Maybe mains for a little bit, but the fact that we are going to be able to do M0s a week before the raid releases, I think there's no real reason to do delves.
Well, let me ask you that actually that was something I was thinking about as you were talking. Like, what is the week before the actual season start going to look like? Because in my mind, I was just like, oh, we'll just run M0s, get our M0s done. Like you'll log into the game, you'll do the story patch content. Hooray! You'll do M0s, you'll get that gear. But then I started thinking, I was like, well, hold on a sec. The M0s are going to be part of the new season. Just like the heroics will be part of the new season, and also the delves will be part of the new season. So like, are we even going to be able to do M0s and delves at all that first week of the new patch?
We might not be able to, but also your main is going to be decently geared going into the patch.
Yeah.
So it might not matter. Again, this is the standard thing that happens every WoW patch cycle, where it's like new season comes out, you have a week that's dead. It used to be 2 weeks in the past. So it's a give and take. Like, take the release date and add a week to it, and that's when you can actually do the like season content stuff.
Yeah, it's always just weird because the patch comes and you want to play WoW and you're excited to play WoW, and then it's like, here's some story stuff. Now wait a week. Come see me in a week. Yeah.
So I guess the next thing to talk about, though, is moving up from M0. We can go to M2s. So 2 things to really talk about for M2s. So the first thing is the bargain affixes going into Mythic Plus are going from starting at the first Keystone level, Mythic 2. They're going to start at Mythic 4 instead. So essentially your Mythic 2 and 3 are just going to be slightly harder dungeons with a timer no affixes.
Yeah, what they're saying is
So,
the affix for those is essentially the timer.
and it gives people an intro into the system without any other pressure other than there being a timer.
Yep.
The other part of this, though, is M2 through 10. So this will include your 2s and 3s. Will scale at 7% per key level rather than 10% per key level. Or what was it, 11% per key level? Whatever it was before. But I know this sounds small. Like, percentages always sound small, but when this gets stacked on top of each other over and over and over and over again, this is going to be significant.
It's
Your
massive.
old M10 is going to feel so much harder than this new Mythic 10. Like, Mythic 10s are going to feel night and day different from doing them in season 1 to season 2.
And even when they start scaling at the traditional 10% after this point, right? And an 11 will be 10% harder, a 12 will be 10% harder, etc. Because the base has been moved so far down from this 7% scaling, that'll still be easier by comparison too. Like a Mythic 11 this season is going to be considerably easier than a Mythic 11 last season. It's basically just a broad nerf to key difficulty across the board. And I don't know, I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing in a system that scales infinitely. Like, the problem fixes itself. If you make the keys too easy, that problem naturally fixes itself, because eventually everyone will hit a point that the keys are too hard. If you make the keys too hard, then you push players out of this part of the system that gear is available at, right? And that was the season 1 problem. The season 1's problem was not just generally Mythic Plus is too hard, because it's okay that everyone has a different level of difficulty they can get to, but that the level of difficulty that the majority of players were getting to was below the cutoff for when you stop getting gear. That was the problem.
Yeah, and again, I'm fine with this change. Like, this change specifically to me personally doesn't make me any difference, because, like, I'm fine if there is a level at which people cannot get gear. It's the same with Mythic rating, but this is generally, like I said, their design philosophy going forward to making plus 12s be where things are supposed to get difficult, like very difficult.
Yeah.
And so making everything up to a 10, which is everything up to where you're going to get your Myth Track Vault and everything like that, easier, is just in line with that design decision. But I think for the more advanced key pushers, the people who are doing 12s or 13s or even higher than that this season, this change is going to be noticeable, but not really impact anything that you do. It's just going to mean you can do 2, 3, key levels higher than you can now.
Yeah, your relative score from one season to the other is going to be higher by roughly 1 or 2 key levels, all other things aside. Yeah. I mean, I'm of the opinion that it's not a huge deal if 10s are easy to do. Like, we saw this in season 3 of Dragonflight. 20s were not that difficult, especially once you started getting gear. So an average player getting to fill their vault with their max item things was not that hard. And ultimately, I think that's fine for the game. The people that want to push higher than that, the people that want to do it for fun and not for gear, still get to do that. The system still works just fine. So yeah, I'm for this for sure.
Yeah, and to piggyback off what you're saying, and correct myself from earlier, I don't really care if there is a level at which people can't obtain gear. I also don't really care if there is everybody can get the gear. Like, it doesn't impact me, right? Like, that doesn't make me any difference. So this is their design decision. If they want to please the majority of the population, it's perfectly fine by me.
Yeah, I place no ego or value in my item level as compared to another player's item level. There are so many other ways to better measure your skill relative to another player than item level that I just don't care about that one at all. Give them all the gear if they want. I don't care.
Well, and they're doing part of what you and I want them to do with these higher things anyways, the more difficult things, the things that people can't get. Just give us fucking cosmetics. Give us sweet, awesome, cool looking cosmetics. Like, they're kind of doing that.
Yep, let someone looking badass differentiate their skill. That's totally fine. I am fine with that. Yep.
To move on though, so bargain affixes move from +2 to +4. So your Zalatas bargain with the like orbs coming in or the dispel or anything like that, that's moving to +4. Tyran and Fortified are moving to Mythic 7 and Mythic 10, respectively, as well. So those are being shifted forward as well. And again, I think this is just generally a good change. It's moving everything to where like once you hit the 10, you still have to do like a significant key to be able to get your gear.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting both Tyran and Fortified. It lets them, as the scaling goes from 7% to 10%, then you have both Tyran and Fortified, which makes it easier for them to tailor bosses and trash because they don't have to worry about, well, we nerfed this boss and now at a 12 or an 11 on Fortified week, it's just a joke. So all in all, I think this is a good change and it's in line with everything else that they're doing. Anything else to add here, Scott?
No, just that you can get heroic track gear from the end of dungeon in a 6 means that you can get heroic track gear without ever having to deal with the tyrannical and fortified affixes, which I find delightful because
Yeah.
I've never been a huge fan of those affixes. I like this current iteration for the exact reason that you said, is because once you're just dealing with keys above level 10 and you have both of them anyway, then they're essentially irrelevant because when everything's special, no one is. So when everything has both affixes at all times, it's as if they don't exist anymore. So yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I was gonna say too is I don't remember. I looked at the chart earlier last week, but is it Mythic 4? I want to say it's like Mythic 4, you start getting hero gear in your vault, right?
I think it's as early. I think it's a 2 in your great
A
vault.
2?
Yeah, in a 2
Okay.
you'll get hero gear in your great vault. So
Well,
you
that
do a key. You
yeah,
participate in the system and you will get one piece of heroic gear a week.
yeah. That in and of itself I think is good as well. Again, I would still like to see them add at some point getting myth track gear from end of dungeon.
Yeah,
That still hasn't been added, but
I think it might be a good thing when we finish going through all these changes, we could maybe take a step back and like look at the system as a whole now and then say, this is great, I love it, but here's some problems that I think still exist from season 1 and before.
mhm. Uh, well, then moving forward, the peril affix we've already touched on. That's moving from 7 keys to 12s. So it is going from being in the quote unquote lower key normal key doer pool into the key pusher pool. And again, like we said earlier, I think that this is just generally a good change. Like outside of straight up removing this affix, I think this is the best thing that they could have done.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a compromise, right? Because originally the level 12 affix was you take away the Zalatas bargain and you added this ridiculous flat 10%. It was actually flat 20. Remember when it was flat 20%? You
Yeah.
fucking idiots. This flat 10%. And then they took that away. And then they said it's not a flat 10%. And now the affix at 12 will be the bargain goes away. And then keys will scale at 12% per level after this point instead of 10%. And I think you and I even talked at that point, was like, that's kind of not anything, actually. Like, it's not that it's not going to affect the keys and make them harder, but it just feels weird for that to be like an affix. So like, now your key is going to scale more aggressively. Like
Yeah.
it would be as in this new system as if they called the change at 10 to go from a 7 to a 10% an affix. You'd be like, no, that's not an affix, that's just the system.
Yeah.
So I think they just came up with a compromise and said, well, we need something to put in this 12 besides the bargain goes away. And they had this 7. And I think the main problem point for the 7 was, in a 7, when you are someone participating in the Mythic Plus system and you are trying to time a 7, the odds that you are pugging are very high, just because that's what most people do in the system. especially when they're at the levels where they're just trying to get crest, they're just trying to get gear, you are most likely pugging. And that death timer affix was so punishing in a group where you weren't communicating via voice chat, you didn't know the people, you had no idea what skill levels and anything, and it just felt like there was nothing you could do, and you were just churning through deaths and then churning through time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, out of 12, I mean, a lot of people still pug at that level of the system. Sure. Less people do. And there are more coordinate groups. And as you said, like they want the 12 to be the demarcation point. It's like you are not a key doer anymore. You are a key pusher. This is
Yeah.
you were a different type of player, and there's a different set of expectations placed on you once you are going to participate in the system at that level.
Mm-hmm. So the other thing that you touched on was the fact that Mythic 12s no longer have a flat bonus associated with them, and doubly on this, they don't have an increase in their scaling either. Like the
No.
only increase in scaling happens at 10, so a 11 to a 12. The only difference is that you lose the Zalatus bargain, and then you get the Challenger's Peril. There's no increase in difficulty from an increased multiplier. There is no flat increase multiplier. It is just the straight 10% additional, which I think ultimately is good. I kind of think this is the way it should have released in the first place,
Yes.
but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like, look, in a system where the first part of it you get gear and you get advancement, and the second part of it is just for the challenge of advancing, I think the number of key levels you have to do in the first part should be as small as possible, and in the second part should be as long as possible, because that is part of
Mhm.
the journey. It is the fun part. We experienced this in season 3 when we had a team. Like the slow buildup of, okay, we've gotten to 23s, let's push 23. We did it. Now let's push 20. Like that slow buildup should have a long tail to it, because that's the fun of pushing keys up higher. And
Yeah.
so getting rid of all these bonus things, like getting rid of the more aggressive scaling, getting rid of all that, allows the push key people to have just a longer range of keys in which they could operate until they hit their own personal wall. And yeah, that's a
Mhm.
good thing, because that's the fun of the system. The fun of the system is slowly building up and watching your key level and watching your score go up. And like, yeah, this is a thing. 2 weeks ago I couldn't do a key on this level, but now I can. And now I was like, that's the fun of it. And that's something they really lost in season 1. So it's very encouraging, I think.
Speaking of pushing your key up and everything, Scott, and having this slow, steady increase, what's the antithesis to that? Key depletion. And boy, oh boy, have they done something about key depletion. Now, it's not a perfect scenario, because like it's still going to be a struggle while you are pushing your keys higher and higher,
Mhm.
but they have implemented a system which is essentially a safety net. So once you have timed all 12s, your key will not deplete past a 12. It won't deplete, it won't decay past a 12. Now, this increases as you have done that with every key at a higher level. So if you've timed all 13s, now it won't go below a 13. If you've timed all 14s, it won't go below a 14. Now, like I said, this isn't going to solve the problem at which you need to push your key up and then you need to time all 13s. So if you're struggling with that last 13, you are still going to have to do a homework key in a 12 to get back to a 13 and then try again. And hopefully it rolls the right fucking key, because that's the most annoying part of all of this. But there is a safety net now. It's better than having nothing, I guess, is the way what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I couldn't believe they did this. This was so great. Like, they announced that they this used to be the thing that was attached to the 2850 score reward. They carved it out of the 2850 score reward. They just said, this is what you get now. Once you're timing 12s, once you move into that key pusher range you're talking about, the second you have all keys timed at 12, this kicks in, and will continue to kick in. I think this is great. Anything that minimizes the amount of homework keys you have to do is really good. And again, homework keys and this concept of homework keys and re-rolling to get the key you want, this is a problem that is isolated to people pushing. Like if
Mhm.
you are just trying to get your 8 mythic dungeons done for the week to fill your vault, this is probably not something you're really that concerned with, because you're probably trying to find the easiest dungeons anyway just to get it done. So, it's not a problem, but it is a problem for those people playing the push game. And so
Yep.
we are going to sort of solve that problem. I think one concern with this system is it could become a problem in a situation where dungeons are not equal with each other. Like if you have like historical in the past, you have some dungeons that are just 2-3 key levels easier than others, then you get a situation where if it like you're kind of stuck by you're held back by your most difficult key. Like I think like Grimbatol, for example, is very challenging this season. And
Yep.
so it's like you've got everything timed on 14, but you can't get a Grimbatol past a 12. That's going to be pretty frustrating because it's like got this whole thing will kick in and it'll become way easier, except for this one damn key we just can't get timed. So I hope that with this comes real efforts to make the parity between dungeons in a season as small as possible. Like we talked about in the past, there's always going to be one that's easier than all the others. There's always going to be one that's harder than all the others. That's fine, and I think that's actually good and healthy for the system. But the gulf between the hardest key and the easiest key cannot be a mass amount of key levels, especially with
Yep.
a design like this.
Yeah, and I guess I want to take a holistic look at what we have talked about so far before we go talk about the rewards, which also I noticed I wrote down that Hero Gear is awarded at a Mythic 2 in Great Vault on here, and
Mhm.
I just said Mythic 4 earlier, so I need to just read my notes.
Yeah, you just I
Uh,
mean, that's what I did. I didn't remember it. It was just written right here on the script, so I just read it.
but anyways, I want to take like a whole look at this, Scott. And I know you like we're gonna re-go over this at the end and talk about things that can be improved. But I think that this is just the first stab at them making Mythic Plus significantly better than it was in season one. And like I was excited going into season one with all of the changes and overhauls and everything that they were doing to Mythic Plus, anyways. And I think that this is obviously their first attempt at iterating on that and making things better, listening to some of the feedback that they've heard, some of the pain points. And obviously, it doesn't solve everything. No fix is ever going to solve every issue that we always have ever had. But I want to think that this is a good first step forward, or second step, maybe.
Yeah. And I mean, this combined with the changes that they've been making to the dungeons over the course of the PTR to lower the amount of interrupts necessary, to lower the amount of tank damage happening, to kind of change and simplify the dungeons across the board. I think it's pretty freaking encouraging. And
Mhm.
I'm pretty excited about what the season has to offer.
I do still fear that we haven't seen any change to stops. Again, that might not be something that we see until midnight, but that is one thing that I think has plagued season one so terribly bad, and hasn't been addressed at all.
I,
Really, in season two, it has changed. Like they've reduced the amount of stops you need. They've made things that they don't want you to kick instant cast, but you still can't stun something in place of a kick.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
My guess would be that change is probably never going to be reverted, and this is how they're going to solve the problem. They're going to solve it from the other end. They're just going to make less things that you need to stop. I don't love that either. I still think that like overlapping those two things in a pug is really annoying and can still result in death. But maybe it'll just matter less. I don't know.
I get the reason that they want to do this, right? Like they don't want you to they don't want the best of the best players to go into a trash pack and essentially have no mechanics to deal with.
Hmm.
I get that. But also it was a huge part of skill expression to be able to do that. Like that wasn't something your average player could do. You would have to go in, you would have to be coordinated, you would have to use CC in the right way so that it didn't get DR'd. Like I don't know. I feel like we lost an avenue of skill expression when they made this change, and it still to this day just rubs me the wrong way. I bitch about it every single one of our podcasts. Like, it still is not something I enjoy.
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong. I just think it's the most boring form of skill expression that there could possibly be. So, like, I agree with you in a system where there was as many stops as there was in season 1. It was incredibly frustrating because it just felt like it was so easy to screw up. If we're moving away from there being that many stops, then I'm less frustrated with it. But I totally get where you're coming from.
Sure. All right. Well, let's talk rewards, Scott.
Yeah.
So, hero gear, like you said earlier, is awarded at Mythic 2 in the Great Vault and Mythic 6 at End of Dungeon. I think this is great. That allows you to get your hero track gear right around the time where you will be doing the dungeons that will get you the crests to upgrade that gear at a reasonable rate. Like, this is good.
Yeah.
The problem that I have, and I think that maybe this is something that we should hold off, but Myth Track gear hasn't changed. Myth Track gear is still only end of the week at your Great Vault. You get a choice of one of out of 3 pieces at +10.
Yeah.
The +10 doesn't bother me. That's fine. But the fact that you only can get it out of the Great Vault from Mythic Plus is still sad.
Yeah, it is. This is still a huge problem, and it's still something that even right now with my alts that I'm playing right now, I find frustrating. Is that it's just this thing where you reach this wall that the only way to bust through this wall is through sheer luck in a dice roll at the end of the week, one piece at a time. And unless you are, and again, this is fixed by crafting gear. Fixed sort of but like I don't know, like I like that crafting gear is an option. I like that this is a thing that you can do, that it's good almost max item level gear that can fill holes in your gearing system. I think there is a weird thing that happens when like you look at your character and 70% of your gear is crafted gear and you're just like, what are we doing? this seems a little silly.
I think that this is also somewhat of a problem too, because like it is one of the only, if not the only, avenue of deterministic loot that we have in the game right now. And you get it once every 2 weeks. And like, while that's fine for an alt that you start playing, 8-10 weeks into the season, for your main, you're still like, you roll the dice on your Great Vault week 1, you don't get shit. You roll the dice on your Great Vault week 2, you don't get shit. Okay, well now you're awarded 1 piece of gear at almost max item level when you had 2 chances at max item level gear, and you still didn't get anything because it was dog shit option. Like, I still think it's maybe too slow, maybe not impactful enough. This is why I want there to be a key level at which you get Myth Track gear. I don't care if it's like a 15. Like, it can be high, but the ability to get it at the end of dungeon, I think, would be in line with something like we do with Mythic Raid. The only difference being is Mythic Raid has a lockout, so I don't know if they need to put like a limit of how many times you can get Myth Track gear. I don't know, but it's still just saddening that you can get 1 piece out of 3 random pieces that you are presented with every week. Like, that's still not cool.
Yeah, I completely agree. Get rid of Myth Track gear, and that's also problem. I've said this before. I'll say it again. Just get rid of it. I don't need it.
Last thing for Mythic Plus.
Well, I just, something you didn't put in your notes here that I just want to say is they have moved Gilded Crest acquisition to a 7 instead of an 8. So they have also moved that down. Now, it is only 10, right? So you will be getting 10 Gilded Crests at a 7, which is less than you've ever gotten before, right? And the introduction of the system, it's always been 12 crests per run.
Do you know what it is on a fail?
I do not. It's usually 4 less, I think, is the standard now. God, so I would guess like it's 6. I would guess it's 6.
And again, this is in line with what we were saying too, with Mythic 6 is going to be giving you end of dungeon hero track gear, but it's also going to be awarding you the highest amount of hero track crests that you're going to be getting.
Yep.
So all of this just plays into itself very perfectly. Like if you're doing 6s, that's where you're comfortable. You can't really do higher. You don't want to do higher. You'll be getting the gear that you need. You'll be getting the most amount of crests that you need to upgrade that gear. And so it's kind of just like the perfect culmination there.
Yep.
The Mythic Plus mount, Scott, do we want to talk about that? It's one, not just a reskin of the first season mount, which is awesome, and two, being moved from, what was it, 2K to 3K now? Or was it 2.5?
So basically what they did is they took away, remember they added that achievement at 2850 that did the key depreciation thing. So they took that out, and in its place they put the mount at 2850. But then because of the changes to dungeon scaling, they moved the mount reward to 3K, which would be roughly equivalent of the difficulty of getting that score in season 1 of 2850, because with the changes in scaling. So it's at 3K now. But yeah, that's why they did it that way.
I don't have a problem with this. Again, it's just shuffling numbers around, and somebody smarter than me has probably done the math that this is essentially not going to make a change to what they wanted it to be beforehand. So
yeah,
no issues with this.
Yeah. So at 3K, I believe all 12s is 2920, somewhere around there. So 3K would be, I think all 13s is over 3K. I think it's like 3050 or something. So 3K would be halfway between all 12s. So it would be all time 12s, some timed 13s would be what gets you this mount. Which puts you in about like the top 1%, I think, roughly, of players.
That does make a pretty big shift from where you got the mount before, though. So mount hunters might be a little upset about that. Because essentially you had to do all fives or so to get the mount last season, because it was just essentially what was 15s before.
Well, yeah, but it's a new mount.
Probably 7s. That's true.
There's 2 mounts now.
Yeah.
You still get the KSM mount.
Yeah. I'm saying
the KSL mount as well.
Your mount collectors, the ones who didn't really have to do like anything that was considered super decently hard to get the KSM mount, now is going to have to do the KSM mount, but also push for the Keystone Legend or whatever they're calling it.
Yeah, well, you know what? Tough shit, man.
I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I have no problems with this.
If they want the mount, they should get the score.
But I do want to do what you were saying, Scott, and I want to talk about things that can be improved. We've already touched on a few things. I think that stops are going in a better position. I don't really know what to call it yet because I haven't gotten to play anything on the PTR. Well, I haven't played anything on the PTR. I could if I wanted to, but again, add-ons are a big stopper there. I think that Mythtrack gear needs to be relooked at. I honestly think I like our suggestion from the last episode where it's just like you remove Mythtrack gear, add those track numbers to hero track, and then gilded crests are used to upgrade at that point. All it does is it allows you to farm a piece of gear and you still have to get the gilded crest to upgrade it.
Yep.
Like, I don't see the problem with that at all. And then the other big thing that I think, Scott, that I am so uncertain of is this season 2 dungeon pool. It has me a little bit worried. Like the War Within dungeons that are in this season 2 pool, I think I'm a bit concerned with. I don't know how they're going to play out. I haven't looked at a lot on the PTR about them, but like the Cinderbroom Meadery first room has me a little bit worried. The minecart in Darkflame Cleft has me a little worried. So things like that have me worried about season 2 more than the actual system itself. I think the dungeon pool has me more worried.
The Eagles were ahead 34-0. Ergo, the season is gonna be great.
Let's hope so. They have made okay. I don't know if we talked about this before. They have made changes to make things better in these dungeons. Like, for example, with the minecart in Dark Flame Clef, I think I was reading they made it move faster, they made the flame last longer. Like, they are doing things to make it better, but there is still going to be this annoying ass RP bullshit that you have to do in the middle of the dungeon that's just kind of annoying. It's the same thing now in City of Threads, where you have to go through, you have to find the fucking guys, and essentially that just kicks off like 2 minutes or more from your key of just shit that you're forced to do every single time. And I don't know. I hate things like that in a time scenario. I get why they're there. I get the flavor. And this is probably not going to be that big of a deal, but it's something that I'm bitching about anyways.
It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be great. If anything, they're making these dungeons too easy. We're gonna be complaining about how easy the dungeons are.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll see about
no,
that.
so I think one of the things that is encouraging though, looking at like the debuff profiles, there are not a lot of really aggressive curses and poisons and diseases in these dungeons. There are a lot of aggressive magic effects. There's a lot as a healer. I sigh in exhaustion at this, but there are a lot of bosses and mini boss and trash mechanics that do the whole throw two debuffs out at the same time. You have to dispel one and then bomb heals on the other thing that Blizzard loves so much that I do not. Um, there's a lot of that, but that's okay because that doesn't really change based on what healer you bring. Although it does really prioritize those that can remove multiple magic debuffs at the same time. Priests are going to be big again. The one thing that I've seen is that this dungeon pool has a lot of bleeds,
I
So I think dwarf game back big. I think dwarf is going to be the best race for this season for sure.
Yeah, the other thing that I was going to say that I've noticed a lot too, healer wise, is it seems like there's a lot of these trash packs that like they have this like just pulsing damage happening constantly.
Yeah.
Like not even like necessarily ramping, but just like massive damage going out to the whole group at all times. And at least from what I was hearing Yoda talk about, your dungeon pulls currently are not going to be limited to your tank's ability to survive, but more so your healer's ability to deal with how many of these mobs you can pull at one time.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty clear since Shadowlands that Blizzard is not satisfied with the idea of the healer meta in Mythic Plus being defined by which healer does the most damage. That actually what they would much rather prefer is that the test of a healer in a dungeon is not how much damage you can eke out while healing people. They want to push healers on HPS. They want to push you on your ability to do spot healing, to do big AoE damage healing, and they want to constantly be testing you. I mean, honestly, it used to be that there were bosses in this game that I just didn't have any healing to do on. Or if I did, like very minimal. There were bosses where I would stay in cat form like the whole time on my resto druid, and then like even in season 3 Dragonflight, like it, toss some trees out while also staying in cat form the whole time.
First boss of Everbloom.
Yeah, there you go. They it seems like they really want to move away from that. It seems like every boss now is going to have some healer check built into it, whether it's just recover from big damage in a certain amount of time, whether it's rot damage, whether it's debuffs that you have to dispel or deal with. It is pretty clear that that is what they want, that they want the healing game to be. I don't hate that. As someone that likes to heal and likes big healing numbers, I do worry in a pug situation where healers already feel like a large amount of the blame and responsibility is pushed onto them for things. I worry how the community will react to that if suddenly the reason the thing that's killing your pug keys is not the timer, is not the tank, is not the DPS, but healing output. I do worry that will scare a lot of people away from the role and compound into a big problem.
Yeah, and I do want to say on the flip side of that, tanking does seem like it's going to be significantly easier this season than it was last season.
That's good.
Not only just because of the fact that tanks are seeming like they have more survivability, but because none of the trash is doing these big nasty tank hits on top of also huge white hits on you.
Yeah.
Like they have removed so many trash tank buster mechanics that tanking this season I think is shaping up to really just be, can you hold aggro on the amount of mobs at which your healer can heal you.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
I
yeah.
think they've mostly fixed the aggro issues. I think one big thing that tanks are feeling right now is they are not doing good damage. Tanks damage is like comparatively low. Like if you say like a good tank would probably do 70%, 60, 70% of a good DPS's, it's down to like 25 to 30% right now.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, they've tweaked the aggro calculus again, so at that level of damage, you're still able to hold threat. But like, I don't know. I don't know. What's your philosophy on this? Because there's a lot of people that are out there like the only people in the game that should be doing damage are the damage people, and every like I think the more damage a tank does, the more people are gonna want to play tank because we're a bunch of weirdos that play this game and we want to see big numbers.
So I kind of agree. I also think that the ability to do a lot of damage on a tank is really what I think the tank skill expression should be. I think the survivability part of a tank should be the thing that kind of comes naturally and just happens as you're doing the rotation. You know, you're pressing your defensives for tank busters, like things that are just naturally happening. I think that the skill expression should come for damage because if you have a tank that can do damage, if played correctly versus somebody not playing that tank correctly, I mean that's the potential of timing a key barely or plus threeing a key. Like
Mm-hmm.
your tank's damage, your healer's damage, like it is that significant. So I would like to see that be the level of skill expression for those roles.
Yeah.
I really don't like the well, can you rotate your cooldowns well enough? Because if not, you just die. Like, obviously, that is a form of skill expression, and I'm not taking that away from the people who can do that. I feel like that's not as engaging. It's not as enjoyable as can you do that as well as deal damage to the point of progressing your group to the next key level.
Yeah, I agree. I want tanks to do great damage. And it's like the trade-off is that at some point you're going to get the situation where a bad DPS player is losing to a good tank, and a lot of people out there would be like, no, 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 that should never happen. And I'm like,
Hmm.
no, yeah, it should. There's your benchmark. You're losing.
Yeah.
You're not doing tank damage. You're doing something wrong. Figure something out. Um, I feel the same way about healers to a lesser extent. You know, like obviously I don't need healers to do like big damn. I think it's fine if they're doing less than the tank who is doing less than the DPS. You could buff it up a little bit though. I guess the biggest problem I have with healer damage right now is healer damage is so disparate between all the different healers. I mean, you have Monk and Disc Priest who just naturally do damage as part of their healing rotation. That's just part of it. And then you have a healer like Resto Druid who literally to do damage needs to stop all healing and go cat form and go cat. And I guess I'm fine with that in my mind. Then the Resto Druid should be doing, while they get to do like full out damage, because they can't do both at the same time, they should be doing leaps and bounds more damage than a healer that gets to do damage while they're healing at the same time. And that is just
Right.
not the case right now. I think historically Blizzard has been very, very bad at balancing healer damage. And part of me gets it because like it's such a low item on their importance thing. Like out of 100 things you need to correct in this game, like making sure healer damage is at parity has to be like the lowest absolute priority. And I get that. I
Yeah.
totally get that. But I would like to see a little bit more of that. Or maybe they're just going to make heal checks so hard that I'm just never going to get to do damage ever.
Yeah. I guess we're gonna see going into season 2. I think it's gonna be very eye opening. So I got to the point of being annoyed as hell having to wait for tanks and healers for our pug keys that I have decided to tank. Scott's going back to healing, and we're never gonna have to wait for a freaking tank and healer again.
Never.
Um,
But that
I'm
means it's all
hopeful.
on us.
Yeah, I am hopeful that that doesn't bite me in the ass. Because if there's something that annoys me to no end, it's somebody who I know could be doing better in damage when we're in like a 13 or 14 or 15, and they're just not doing it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, God damn it, let me just go back to doing DPS. But yeah,
So
I don't know.
we did kind of jump off our topic at hand, though. We got distracted. But I mean, because
We
our
did.
topic was like, they've added a reward above KSH. They've got like KSL is a thing that exists now. There's Keystone Legend, and it has a reward at it. It's a mount. You get a new exclusive mount. There's nowhere else you can get this mount. It's just here. This is this only mount that looks like this. And hell yeah, man. This is great news. This is great news. I hope this is the first step in what ends up being a long new way of looking at rewards in this system, because right now the top 1% cutoff, or the top 0.1% cutoff, the title cutoff right now is 3416,
Hmm.
at least in the US. So the difference between 33 or between 3K, which is the top reward that you would get under this new system, and the cutoff is 400 points. That's a lot of room for other stuff in there, like cosmetics, yeah, like just
Shit for your house.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of room in there to add stuff. And like, we talked about the reward at 2500 is, this kind of exclusive glow look for your, it's not exclusive, it's just the glow look the mythic level item has, and you get to put that glow look on the non-mythic level tiers if you like that color loadout, which is a cool reward. I'm not balking at that reward. I like that. But what if at 3200 score you get an exclusive mythic plus only recolor of your tier set?
Hmm.
That'd be cool. That'd be something to push for.
I almost wonder, Scott, how would you feel about like in season 3, for example, we don't get any more rewards added, but instead of at 3K we get a mount, it's some armor cosmetic set. Like,
Fine.
are you tied to the fact that 3K needs to have a mount every season now?
No, no. I mean, like, I think mounts are fun rewards, but I almost exclusively do not use that many of the mounts I get. Like, I don't think I'm going to use this mount. But like,
Yeah.
the thing is not that it is what it is. It's that there's something that you can get, and that is motivating. Is like, it's not just like, throughout Dragonflight, my goal was always especially when I was just playing by myself, my goal was, I want to break 3K. Why do I want to break 3K? Not because I get anything about it. I just set this personal goal for myself. And suddenly, now the game has kind of set the goal for you. You want to break 3K? Well, we'll give you a little pat on the back for that. Is it a mount?
Yeah.
Is it armor? I don't care. I don't care. And then if they say, "Well, that's great, good job. We got another little carrot for you at 3200. Just get that." And
Yeah.
then like just to kind of push and pull you along in the system. And again, there's going to reach a point where it's a score level that I personally can't get to, and there might be some cool armor or cool mount or cool thing at that level that is beyond me. And am I going to be bummed? Yeah. But also, that's okay. That's fair. Especially if it's cosmetic, especially if it's just a look. Like, I swear half of this game back when it first came out was getting the awesome looking fucking sword, and then getting to stand in Stormwind or Agrimmar and have everyone go, "Oh, holy shit. He's got the sword." And that's it. And that's it. So like,
Yeah.
give people the gear and the item level they need to try to do as hard of content as they possibly can, and then the people that do get to do it, reward them with something that is just for them, that looks like unique and stands out, and you'll be walking through your neighborhood in your new house, and you walk by Jeff's house, and Jeff has a fucking new sword in his hand, and you're like, oh, Jeff got 3K, or Jeff got 3,200. That's great. I love that.
I think that this ties in perfectly with the housing system because even though like we're talking about transmog, we're talking about mounts, we're talking about rewards that we have experienced in the game. This housing system is going to open up a whole new thing. Like they've already talked about like being able to mount Onyxia's head. They've already talked about being able to mount like old armor sets and things like that on your walls. And so like even if past 3K you're getting things for your house, or maybe you get like a different floor tile or something like that, like there is things that they can do that hopefully are lower on the artistic side, that they don't have to worry about animations and shit like that, for every race, that they can just kind of do it, and it can be different every season. It doesn't have to be like, okay, well, you got a dragon head for getting 3,200 and now it's season 2, and you got a purple dragon head for getting 3,200. Like, I want to see them continue to do these unique rewards. Like I said, if we go into season 3 and 3K doesn't get us just a recolor of the same fucking mount we're getting in season 2, but it gets us something entirely new and entirely different,
Mm-hmm.
I'm all for that. I'm perfectly fine with that. It doesn't have to be a mount. It definitely doesn't have to be a mount. This is a fucking recolor of the shit that we already have.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm looking forward to this reward system. I'm looking forward to them adding things to it. I'm looking forward to them seeing what they can do. I mean, as long as they have a budget to allocate towards this, I want to see what they can do. But I think that does segue us pretty well into housing, Scott.
Yeah.
And this housing announcement that happened. So a quick little overview of what happened. To my understanding, Scott, you can elaborate on things that I miss. But essentially, there's going to be neighborhoods in the game. Neighborhoods are going to have a player maximum in each neighborhood, and there's going to be public neighborhoods. There's also going to be private neighborhoods for like guilds and communities, in that like only members from your guild can be in those. I don't know how that's gonna work out. I don't know, like I'm assuming you're not gonna be allowed to have two houses. Are you gonna have to pay for like a neighborhood for your guild and then guildies can move into that? Like I don't know how all of that's gonna work out. I don't know what the like physicality of all of these things are gonna be. Like, can I just go to some random neighborhood and see, 50 or so people's houses there that I don't even know, but I wanted to go walk around and check it out? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Essentially, they took the good part of the Final Fantasy housing, in that you get to see other people around you and have this like persistent area, and removed the annoyance of the lottery system.
Yeah.
Like that's the best way I can explain it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you hit the major points perfectly. So the big things are that they want this to be a deeply social system. That's one of the three pillars they use, was deeply social. And I think that's part of the neighborhood ideology, is that like you are and it, like, the neighborhood will be just like you said, it'll be just like in Final Fantasy, where even if you're in a public neighborhood that you were randomly put in when you got your house, you were randomly deposited there with 49 other people who randomly got deposited there. That will be persistent. That outside of sharding or anything, it will be you and those 49 neighbors for as long as you play the game. Now they could, in theory, move to another neighborhood, right? But essentially, it is persistent, and so this will be a little kind of world within a world for you there. I think it's really cool because, yeah, I mean, like, one of the things they talk a big game about how social they want the system to be, and in the back of your head you're like, well, this is going to be pulling everyone from the hub cities,
Mhm.
uh, at least a little bit. And so how do you make it? How do you make a system that is pulling people away from other people, a social system? And this neighborhood thing seems to be the way to solve that, because, yeah, you're going to persist. Like, so the other thing they said is there's going to be two zones at the start of this thing. One for Horde, one for Alliance. The Alliance one is going to be just Stormwind type related, like Elwyn Forest. It's probably going to take place, right out on in the suburbs of Stormwind. The Horde one is going to be like Agramar, Duratar, Ajara type aesthetic, just on the outskirts of Agramar. And those are the only two right now. And part of the reason why those are the only two right now is because they want to concentrate people in one place, or two places technically. And the more different neighborhoods and styles you have, the more spread out the population becomes. I'm not saying they'll never do those things, but right now at the beginning, this is what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about before how I'm not like a huge player housing person, right? Like this is not the pillar of the game that I find super attractive and fun. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to like design a house for myself. Never been a huge pull for me, but this post got me excited. It got me excited at what the design idea for a neighborhood was, even a private neighborhood. Like this idea that we have our guild and our group of friends that are in a private neighborhood. We all get to build our own houses, but we also have this communal area we all get to hang out. I don't know what the zone is going to look like yet. I kind of envision it where it will have like you'll have plots of land for each house that each person will build up, but I kind of do envision it as having some communal areas as well,
Yeah.
like a communal park, or maybe just like amenities. Like maybe these neighborhoods will have their own bank or their own auction house or their own crafting area, and those will be communal, and you'll have to go. So like essentially it is a hub. It is Agramar. It is Dorn, but your own instance version of it where you and your 59 49 friends or strangers that you learn and recognize and maybe bond with over the course of living in the same neighborhood. Like that on paper and in philosophy sounds really cool to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say, I think the thing that I am looking forward to the most is the ability for guilds to kind of have these areas for themselves, because like people have been asking for not only housing but guild housing in
Yeah.
this game for so long, and like this is kind of a step in that direction. Like if you have a guild neighborhood, um everybody can be together. They can be in one central area. I don't know as far as what all amenities they're going to be okay adding in these neighborhoods because of the disaster that was garrisons when they put everything in your garrison and you never had to see anybody ever.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a pretty good argument for them to have some things in there because there are other people that are going to be there. Um, Now, the one thing that I will say about Final Fantasy that you'll notice if you play the game and you go to the housing districts, you might see your neighbors every once in a while, but 9 times out of 10, you just get to see their house. They're not actually there.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a little concerned that this just might turn into that, which is why, again, I'm more excited for this private plot stuff because then you can have like I'll hang out with my guildies in our guild neighborhood thing.
Yeah. So I agree. And that's because Final Fantasy is in this push and pull relationship between wanting to give you your own like plot and your own house and your own neighborhood, but also encouraging people to hang out in the hubs.
Hmm.
Each Final Fantasy expansion has two hubs. One hub has a lot of the crafting stuff and the market board. The other hub has like all the gear upgrades things. So you're kind of forced to exist in both hubs at the same while also having your own home. And you're right. The end result is that people really don't hang out in their neighborhoods very much unless they're doing like weird Final Fantasy sex party stuff. That's a weird fucking game, man. And by the way, I'm not saying like there will certainly be like weird WoW sex shit like with this neighbor, like 100%. That's not unique to Final Fantasy. But it hasn't happened yet, so I get to pretend that it doesn't exist in this game. Um, I guess what I think with this kind of stuff is like, what if in Midnight there is no new hub? What if in Midnight your neighborhood is your hub? That, you know, there are cities like we kind of know Silvermoon is going to be rebuilt as part of Midnight, and possibly accessible by both Horde and Alliance. And so there might be story stuff there and quest stuff there, and maybe even some uh, commodities and utilities and things like that there. But what if like the way they design the game, especially to push the housing stuff, is they really do want you to just hang out in your neighborhood. Um, and so it will have a lot of that stuff within the neighborhood itself.
Oh,
I mean, I don't know if that's evergreen in the way like because one thing they did say is they want this housing system to not just be the feature. Like they made it clear they don't want to do this the way of Garrisons, that like this expansion is going to come and go and they're going to leave the housing thing behind. We're going to go do off and do something else. They want this system to be, this is your house, this is your neighborhood. You're going to keep building this house, changing the decoration as you get new stuff, collecting things for the rest of the time with the game.
yeah.
And so maybe it is impractical to say that like there's just never going to be a hub in World of Warcraft ever again, that the hub's always going to be your neighborhood. But maybe for this first iteration of it, that will be the case.
Right. So I do have something completely off topic, Scott. I think that you're onto something. I'm interested to see what they're going to do there. I am a little bit worried about the push and pull that you were talking about. If we do end up having hub cities and there isn't like any reason to be in the neighborhood, it's going to be weird being there. Like at least give us like target dummies or something like that. Like that's the main reason that I went to our guild house in Final Fantasy, was target dummies. You could repair your gear, all of that shit there. So I'd like to at least see something like that.
Yeah.
But I do have a question, and it just came to mind while you were talking. But you said that there's only going to be a Horde and an Alliance version of housing. What happens if I have both characters?
So they have addressed this actually. You cannot you cannot get your plot of land in the Horde territory on your Alliance character, but this house is for your entire warband. So once you've, like, let's say you play a night elf, but you really want to live in Augermar, literally all you have to do is make an orc and get the house on your orc, and then you can send your night elf to the house, and that's fine, and you can do that. So yeah, they're completely fine with it. So yeah, if we have a guild that's our guild is predominantly Alliance, because our guild was an Alliance guild before they opened everything up and let you have both. So most likely, if we were to have a private guild neighborhood, it would be in Stormwind, and then all of our Horde players would be like, well, we want to come. Literally all they have to do is have an Alliance character and make the house, and then they can their Horde character can come hang out in the neighborhood.
So I don't know. I'm interested in this. I want to see them add more neighborhood styles. I'm interested how that's going to play out with like guild neighborhoods. Like, are you just going to be able to up and say, okay, now they added, I don't know, a night elf style, and we want to go from Stormwind to Teldrassil or something like that. Like, are you just going to be able to flip the switch and change that? Is it going to be locked behind a paywall? Is it going to be like, there's a lot of questions that I have, and a lot of things that probably aren't even going to be answered in Midnight, because they're not doing this in Midnight. There is just going to be 2. But I'm interested, since this is an evergreen system, how does this evolve? Where do we go from here? How do you iterate on it? It's the same question I have about talents, and still have about talents. Like, talents were evergreen, and we got hero talents. So what happens in Midnight? Hero talents? More hero talents? Another talent tree? Like, if a thing is going to be evergreen, you have to have a plan to iterate on it. And so that's my biggest question with housing, is how are we going to iterate on this?
I agree. My guess, by the way, is, one of the things they emphasized is one of their pillars was a home for everyone, right? This is where they specifically gave a middle finger to Final Fantasy 14. And this is, I think, to pat ourselves on the back a little bit, something you and I predicted just when they first made that housing announcement was, if they're going to make this a pillar of an expansion, which they are, they're going to give a house to everyone. Every single person that plays this game will get a house. They will not have to spend money on the house. They will get it, and they will be able to decorate it with drops and stuff gained in the game. I think My personal opinion is when we start talking about these private neighborhoods, that's going to cost something. If whether it's just gold, whether it's gold and has an upkeep, like one of the things they said is not only will you get the house and the plot for free in this game, you will know there will be no upkeep, there will be no mortgage, you will not lose your plot if you unsub from the game for a certain amount of time. Again, throwing direct shade at Final Fantasy 14. I do think when you start, like, look at the way they worded this. I think this is very telling, the way they worded it. Public neighborhoods, which the game servers are responsible for created and as needed and maintaining. Private neighborhoods created by a group of friends or guilds to inhabit, progress, and customize together. So the first one is, we are responsible for creating and maintaining public neighborhoods. So the maintenance and the storage, I guess we could call it, for public neighborhoods, that's on us. But by implication, then, in private neighborhoods, that's not on us anymore. That's on you. And what does that mean? That means cost. That means it's
Yeah.
going to cost some money. So whether it's like, yeah, monthly gold upkeep or something to maintain, very possibly, I would not be surprised at all if that was the case.
Yeah. Well, anyways, all of this aside, Scott, I'm excited for the housing. I think that this announcement was kind of everything that we had hoped for, that it was going to be.
Yeah.
And without going into more detail on what housing itself is going to look like, but just rather the like plot structure and everything like that, it's definitely going in the right direction. So, still very much so optimistic for this, but
Yeah.
that's really all the details they gave. There's not really much more to infer from this.
I love when they take a second, though, to just outline their design philosophy. You and I have
Yep.
talked about this. We've asked for this in many other facets of the game, and this is exactly what they're doing here. We're like, look, we don't have all the details for you yet. Part of that is because we're still working out a lot of the details, a lot of the specific technical stuff. But here's our philosophy. Here's the things that are important for us. Here's the things that we're building these systems with in mind.
Yep.
And I really do appreciate that.
So I guess the only other question mark that there is for housing now is like, how is the player going to interact with this? And so hopefully as we get closer to midnight, we'll see that. Like, what does your house look like? What kind of customization can you do? Do you get to change everything about it, or are you given a stock standard and then all you can do is hang stuff on the wall?
Yeah.
Like, that information is still the stuff that needs to come out. I think that's going to be the major backbone to this, but I think that they've got a good idea on what they want to achieve with housing and with neighborhoods, in that they're not trying to silo people off, but rather bring people together. So I think we have a good foundation.
Yep.
Okay. All of that is like the major news, the Mythic Plus changes, the housing. I did want to take just 2 seconds to really talk about TGP. I mean, we touched on it at the very beginning, but like, I think it is worth saying that I think that if this was an experimental season for them in what they're trying to accomplish, they might want to go back to the drawing board. I think that the TGP format this time around was much, 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 much more viewable. There were only 4 teams competing at any given time. They have an overlay for displaying 4 teams. You didn't have to like potentially miss things that were happening to teams that weren't on camera, or if they were like blowing things up, then you missed like 6 other teams or 7 other teams, whatever it was. It did change the scoring a bit. Teams got knocked out after 1 day of playing rather than 2 days of playing, or over the course of 2 days of playing. So I don't know. It's a push and a pull. I think that this is good, but I think that the experiment as a whole with TGP and MDI in one season was kind of a failed experiment.
Yeah, I'm pretty mixed on the format change myself. I agree with you. So essentially, what what TGP in the group stage used to be was that there were 6 teams competing. The first day there were 3 dungeons. The second day, an additional 2 dungeons unlocked, and the final day, an additional dungeon unlocked. And then obviously, teams with the most score wins. The way they did it in the group stage was the team with the lowest score on both the first and the second day were eliminated at the end of the day. And then obviously at the end of the third day, the two highest teams move on. That's not the case anymore, right? They changed it. So instead, instead they made it Friday and Saturday are 4 teams each day, 4 different teams each day. They do 3 dungeons that day, and at the end of the day, the team with the 2 teams with the highest score move on to Sunday, and then Sunday is those 4 teams that advanced 3 new dungeons, and then the two of those 2 teams move on to the global finals. I from a watchability perspective, I completely agree with you. There's only 4 teams running at a time, so there's never going to be a situation in which we can't see what a team is doing if they're doing the 4 square. I do think that one of the cool things about TGP was kind of the strategy of how long do you commit to trying to level up this dungeon versus getting some of the other dungeons done at an easy difficulty, like especially with the idea of like by the end of day 1 the team with the lowest score is going to go home, so you have to decide as a team, are you going to try to push this key past 20, or are you just going to go to the other key
Yep.
and try to get that up to a decent level just to secure your spot. And then like how like and especially since on Saturday and Sunday you could still technically go back to one of those keys that was unlocked on Friday. It's like we pushed it up but we didn't get quite high enough. Tomorrow there's only 2 new keys we have to do, so we should have time to go back to one of these 3 dungeons and push that up a little bit. And I feel like in this new format, that strategic thinking is just kind of gone now.
Yep.
And I feel like TGP loses a little bit of its uniqueness when you do something like that. I don't know. What do you think?
I completely agree. I think that I can't really think of a word for it other than the new format almost feels rushed. Like it doesn't seem like there is enough time dedicated from each of these teams to not just feel like it's just a rush to get all your dungeons done, and then once you get all of that, then see how high you can push things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like you were saying before, there was a strategy, it was kind of slower, you could kind of push and prod with other teams, like you can time a key, the highest key, and then you can sit there and wait and see if somebody else times it, and then you can go back to that key, and all of that's gone, right? Like you can still monitor the stream, you can still do that stuff, but it's all in one day. They only have a certain amount of time for that day, and then the bottom 2 teams are gone, and then you're waiting until you get a whole new dungeon pool on Sunday. You don't get to go back and retry things. You don't get to prove that you can do better than you did. You just did what you had to do to move on, which I guess in one hand is kind of what they were doing before. But yeah, I completely agree with you. All of that to say, I completely agree that the strategy seems to be kind of taken out of the sales here.
And it would allow, like, there was this really interesting thing that would happen late Sunday afternoon where you've basically leveled up all your keys, and then you've got maybe 3 teams tied, and then you're starting to play for time, and then also you're starting to play for, like, if we get this one on a 21 we win. Like, no one's ever done a 21 of this dungeon before. Do we think it's possible? If we get it, then we win the tournament. And like like TGP is pretty well known for getting a lot of world first keys in it. Like this is the first time anyone has ever done a key this high. I didn't see any last week. And granted, I didn't follow as closely as I normally do, so maybe there was some. But I didn't see any, and I think part of that is just a change in how we do this thing. That's like you have 1 day, 3 dungeons, that's it. And so
Yeah.
you're going to spend a fair amount of time just getting that dungeon up from a 16 or a 17 up to the 20. How much time are you going to be having to smash your head against that 20 to see if you can do something that nobody's ever done before?
All of these changes that they've made to TGP and the formatting for having MDI and TGP in one season, Scott, it really brings me back to a core question that I think you and I have asked before. But like, what does WoW as an esport mean?
Yeah.
Because like as it stands right now, like PvP is pretty well figured out. Like PvP as an esport is arenas. It's 3v3 arenas and that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But what does PvE WoW as an esport mean? Because we have the Race to World First, which I think by far gets the most coverage and the most viewership. We have the MDI, which I think gets quite a bit of viewership. And then we have TGP, which I think gets less viewership, but ultimately is a better display of skill as far as doing hard content, like hard cutting edge content, than MDI is.
Mm-hmm.
But MDI is a different show of skill and it's fast paced, it's fun to see. So, like, I think that almost saying this out loud, I feel like the MDI is just the better form of an esport as a viewing purpose than TGP is because it's a head to
Yeah.
head, it's a race, it's something that you can root for a team, people can do crazy shit. And it makes me kind of sad because I prefer TGP. Like I
Yeah.
like seeing people do high keys. But I almost feel like WoW as an esport is like Race to World First. It should probably be MDI and then AWC. Like I almost wonder if TGP is starting to phase itself out.
Yeah, that's interesting because I agree with you. And we've talked about this before that I think TGP most closely imitates what Mythic Plus is as a system, right? Like it is much closer to imitating that than MDI is. And like nobody nobody interfaces with Mythic Plus system the way people do in MDI, right? It's like let's
Hmm.
do an intentionally lower key than anyone else is doing, but let's see how fucking ridiculous we can be at pulling it. That doesn't exist in the game in any way, shape, or form. But
Yeah.
TGP does. It's just in an isolated, competitive, shortened version of it. But yeah, maybe ultimately that doesn't work in an esport fashion. Like I think maybe, and again, I don't PvP, so tell me if I'm completely wrong here. You're absolutely right that arenas are the esport PvP experience, but I
Hmm.
almost feel like battlegrounds are much closer to like what World of Warcraft PvP was originally envisioned as. It
Yeah.
just doesn't work as an esport, really.
Yeah, I mean, Battlegrounds were the initial PvP, right? Like
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
open world PvP, and then it was Battlegrounds. Arenas were added later, so
yeah,
I completely get that. And it, like the MMO aspect of player versus player is big battles, everybody fighting each other, free for all garbage that's
yeah,
happening. Um, and Arenas is very much so not that. But what Arenas has is it takes the player versus player aspect, and I think, and really like talking more about it, I really think this is what makes MDI so good is it puts one team against another team and MDI puts one team against another team.
mm-hmm.
TGP is a free for all. It's hard to follow if you don't know what's going on, and it's kind of like a bloodbath or a slogfest to get through the hours at which you have to do, rather than how fast can we go? These two teams against each other. Okay, next two teams against each other because like that's what the AWC is.
Yeah,
That's what MDI is, and both of those get very decent
yeah,
viewership.
yeah. No, I think you might just be just 100% right here. That like just being the system that is better and maybe even closer to what the core gameplay of the game is does not make for a better esport. And actually the better esport is the one that doesn't actually closely match what anyone actually does in the game. I know that doesn't quite work for arenas because like a lot of people just play arenas and that's their like that doesn't quite work the same way, but yeah, I mean I think the idea is there for sure.
It makes me sad though because like there is nothing more saddening than watching the MDI and being like, yeah, I'm never going to do this shit because I would rather do higher keys than low keys in stupid polls.
Mhm.
Like, it's just, I don't know. It's saddening to see that that is kind of where we're at. But I do think, as a viewer who has watched these things year after year after year, expansion after expansion, like, that's really the way that I'm starting to lean towards. Like,
Yeah.
Race to World First, I think, is the pinnacle of WoW esports, even though it's not sanctioned by Blizzard, as far as PvE is concerned. But I think
Yeah.
probably MDI is the sanctioned one by Blizzard that is probably the best performing.
Yeah, and like gosh, MDI is just like let's be honest here. very few people who watch these competitions watch them straight through from first hour to last hour every day that the
Right.
competition is running, right? Like if you're watching TGP, you're probably like stepping in and watching for 20 minutes to an hour here or there. And then you go on your way. Like, I mean, that's my experience. And I'm guessing that my experience is similar to others. But like the thing
Mhm.
with MDI is when you do that, you can like say like, okay, I've got a meeting in 20 minutes, but like this match is about to start. And like I know that I'm going to see two teams go at each other for 20 minutes and then I got to leave. And I'm not going to maybe see the results of the end of the day of everything, but I'm going to know that Echo beat Mandatory on this map in this head to head on this
Yep.
day. And it's so much easier to watch in the bite-sized chunks.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Like I said, I think that this season was pretty much a failed experiment.
Yeah.
I personally don't want to see TGP go away. I do enjoy like watching it and everything still,
Mm-hmm.
but I do almost wonder like if it is a budgeting thing or something like that. Like we've got to be looking at what's going to get the axe first here, and I can only imagine it's going to be TGP.
I think so. Yeah.
All right, Scott. Well, I don't have anything else to cover. And again, there's going to be more announcements. We're recording on Monday. I want to wager to guess tomorrow or Wednesday we will hear the release date for 11.1.
I think there's greater than 70% possibility that by the time people are hearing this podcast, the release date for 11.1 will be out. I think it's going to be tomorrow, aka Tuesday, that they will tell us. And just to put it out there, I think I'm pretty certain the patch will come out on the 25th of February with the season starting on March 4th. I'm pretty sure that's just going to be what we're doing now. There's been lots of little tiny clues, and then also Towley just going on his stream and saying those exact things. Which is, I think it's so funny that he not only does he have all this inside information that he continue to tell him, but he just never seems to give a shit about leaking it and the consequences of it ever.
Tully's great. I
He's
love
great,
Tully.
isn't he? He's just gonna say it as like, what are you gonna do?
I will say we have to swallow an L on this one though, Scott, because initially you and I were thinking that this wasn't going to get released until March, which
Yeah.
means and to give ourselves a benefit of the doubt, this was with the initial TGP structure, and we thought it was going to go a week longer and everything like that.
Yeah, the mistake we made was assuming there was going to be a whole weekend between the group stage and the global finals. And if there had been, that would have made perfect sense, but there is not. So, yeah.
Well, all right, guys. I think we're about at time. So the question that I have for you guys this week is, which of the Mythic Plus changes are you guys most looking forward to? I think that mine is the level 7 affix being moved to level 12. That is definitely the thing that I am most looking forward to. It's going to be making pugging keys that much easier. But I want to know what you guys are excited for. So, as always, contact us over at yellingintothevoidwow@gmail.com. YouTube's at Yelling Into the Void Wow, and Twitter is at Into the Void Wow.
And if you are not already subscribed to this podcast, please do so. As we just stated definitively, the patch will be out on the 25th of February. That's a fact. There's no way it's wrong. And we're going to be covering that patch. We're going to be letting y'all know what we think of the story, the raid, the Mythic Plus season, everything. The drive system, all of it will be there talking about it, so you don't want to miss it. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and pretty much anywhere else in the world podcasts can be found.
Also, please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting on YouTube. All of that helps us get more exposure, helps us get introduced to new people, and allows us to continue making the content that we do here. So, if anything that we said you guys agree with, or maybe you disagree with and you want to have a little conversation, please, as always, comment on the YouTube and we will get back to you. But guys, until next week. We'll just be over here yelling into the void.